As Jacob Katz said, Hasidism, like the Haskalah, was also a kind of a revolutionary movement, but coming from a very different place. It was a movement that, in some ways, was an incredible religious revival. It was a movement that, like the Haskalah, took dead aim at some of the basic values of traditional Jewish society. And it swept large parts of Eastern Europe like wildfire in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now, one thing that really sticks out here is that Hasidism was basically, almost entirely, confined to Yiddish-speaking Ashkenaz. It got very little traction in Holland, Germany, France. It was very much part and parcel of that Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazi Jewish culture, which we'll talk more about as we go on. And when I say Hasidism challenged basic values of traditional Jewish society, what am I talking about? At least, just as the Haskalah challenged Jewish education with its emphasis on Talmud and the Talmud Chacham, and just as the Haskalah challenged the model of the Jewish leader as the rabbi or the leader of the Kahal, and wanted a new kind of leadership and a new kind of educational value, Hasidism challenged these values from a different direction. At least in its earliest iteration, and later on a lot of this would change, but in its earliest iteration, Hasidism called into question the absolute primacy of Talmud study. And instead, it put forward a new emphasis on prayer. If you read the autobiography of Maimon, another example of this early Haskalah emphasis on me, the self, Maimon describes a situation where he's been on the road for 6 weeks, hasn't had a bath or a shower, clearly smells, but a wealthy Jew is so impressed by his knowledge of the Talmud that he invites him to sit at the family table, where the daughter of the wealthy Jew is in a state of absolute shock that she has to sit next to him. But it just shows you how a Talmud Chacham is so automatically respected in traditional Jewish society. And in the Hasidic movement, there was a new emphasis on prayer and a new emphasis on kavana, on devotion. And that made religion more accessible, more available to everybody. Hasidism emphasized a new concept of dveikus, of being able to cleave to God. And to do this, you had to get into the proper mood. You had to get into the proper frame of mind. In early Hasidism, if that meant singing a niggun, if it meant dancing, if it meant drinking, especially with your fellow Hasidim, well, do it. Because the important thing is to banish atzvus, to banish sadness. God is everywhere. And there's no place without God. And you could feel that, you could sense that. But you need a helper. You need what you might call a life coach. And the life coach is, in fact, one of the great innovations of Hasidism, the tzaddik, or the Rebbe. The Rebbe has spiritual powers that could help you achieve a sense of God's presence, The Rebbe could help you with Bitul Hayesh, with overcoming your materiality, overcoming the material world. The Rebbe could help you with Dveikus. The Rebbe could help you with Kavaneh. The Rebbe could also help you with your own personal issues. Now, as I said, later on, many of these features of early Hasidism are going to be modified. There are going to be Hasidic yeshivas, there's going to be Hasidic emphasis on serious Talmud study, but what we're talking about are some of the features that made the movement so attractive in the 18th century. Now, why did the Hasidic movement develop? And as I said this morning, when it began, there was a great deal of opposition to it. The 18th century was a troubled time for traditional Jewish society, rapid rise in population. Many Jews were dealing with dislocation and poverty. The Polish state was facing a growing political crisis, more interference by the nobility in internal Jewish affairs. There was a Yiddish expression, Fanya will blozen shofar, Ivan wants to blow shofar, which means that the Gentiles are trying to intervene in our affairs. And what that meant, one, was that the prestige of rabbis, in many cases, was declining, and two, the prestige of the Kahal was declining, and with it, the ability of the Kahal to enforce discipline on what it felt was unruly troublemakers or on unruly sects, SECTS. But yet there was another factor in the rise of the Hasidic movement, and that was the interplay between the popularization of Kabbalah and printing, which made Kabbalah, or at least practical Kabbalah, more accessible. And with it, a new interest in the values of spirituality, devotion, intention, and so on. One aspect of this popularization of Kabbalah was a growing interest in the writings of, or the interpretations of the teachings of the Ari, Rabbi Luria of Sfat. The Lurianic Kabbalah played a very, very important role in helping people deal with some very important problems that affected Jewish life. I'm sure you're all familiar with kind of the basic ABCs of the Lurianic Kabbalah, right? The creation of the world, the breaking of the vessels, the sparks imprisoned in the shards of the broken vessels. You all know that, right? But what's interesting is that you could then think about the Lurianic Kabbalah in such ways that the Jewish people becomes a partner with God in repairing the vessels. The whole idea of galut, of exile, parallels God's voluntary exile in the making of the world. For the world to be created, God had to contract himself, the tzimtzum. There's a new purpose and an explanation for prayer by focusing literally on the words of prayer. You may be helping to liberate certain sparks from shards. By performing the mitzvot, you are helping to repair the world.